to study Korean. And when I was in Seoul, at Embassy Seoul, they said, if you like studying languages, you should consider becoming a US diplomat. And just to make it clear, like, I enjoy studying languages, but I'm not good at languages. But I applied for a Congressman Rangel Congressional Fellowship. And so Congressman Rangel was an African-American congressman from New York, traveled all around the world, and what people always thought he was the driver. And so what he realized was the face of American diplomacy wasn't reflective of the diversity of America. So he created this program that recruited 20 young individuals from across the country on ethnic diversity, regional diversity, to diversify the State Department. And so Congress paid for my education at Johns Hopkins University. So I got my master's in international economics. And then I was a fellow for Congressman Faleo Mavaenga from American Samoa. I did my diplomatic training in Embassy Seoul, and it pipelined me into the Foreign Service, where I served our country for 8 years in Colombia, Pakistan, Venezuela, and with the Secretary of State's office.
American Samoa, that's a non-voting position in the Congress, is right? But that means you were on Capitol Hill.
Correct.
And his office was in one of the buildings nearby.
It was in Rayburn Building. He was also the chairman of the East Asia Pacific Committee at the time, and so I served on the committee.
Okay. Well, then you decided to run, not even 2 years ago, for this open seat. Was that Chris Lee's?
Cynthia Thielen's seat.
Oh, I stand corrected. So that would have been Kaneohe Bay Drive, is that right?
Yes, correct.
And what other parts are your district?
So it's what you think of downtown Kailua. It stops before you enter Enchanted Lakes, and then if you're familiar with the dike,
Sure.
that's the border. Koinui wetlands is not included, and then basically Kaneohe Bay Drive.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is coming from my mom. No favoritism here, but she did send a question in. Here, I'm not taking any questions from others, but I'm going to take one from my mom. She actually wonders why you're leaving District 50 early, not even serving one full term, all ready to run for the U.S. Congress. I think it's a fair question.
Yeah, I think it's very fair. She's one of my favorite constituents.
You're pandering to the host here, to the moderator.
She emails regularly. But for me, it's about you never can choose your time of service, right? I was just as surprised as everyone else when Congressman Kahele announced that he was running for governor. It was a surprise to me. And what you can choose when it comes to service is about picking your time of service. And for me, it's always about heeding that call. When they needed diplomats in Pakistan, I was supposed to go to Seoul. I volunteered. And I think for me and my unique background, it uniquely positions me for the position. I'm the only current state representative with significant DC experience. I've served abroad, but I've also served at the National Security, Foreign Policy, and with the Secretary of State's office. But I'm also going into the job with the eyes wide open as well. This job requires someone who understands that travel. I've done that travel back and forth, 17 hours into Afghanistan, negotiate for 6 hours, back to DC, and then on to the next. And this job requires someone who knows the travel, can go back and forth, but realizes when you're in Honolulu, you'd have to go to Molokai, Lanai, Hawaii, Kauai, and continue. And I think for me, I'm able to build that. And also people have asked the question about, you're young, right? But I'm the same age as Senator Inouye when he went to Congress, 35. 35. Senator Inouye went when he was 35, Patsy Mink at 37, and Brian Schatz was elected to statewide office at 38. And so what's exciting about younger candidates is they can build something for Hawaii and build that seniority, which is so critical when getting resources back.
It's a 10-hour flight if you fly direct, if you can get into Dulles or into Reagan.
Yeah.
How do you handle planes? Do you sleep well on planes, or do you fidget? Are you restless?
I actually fall asleep before the plane even takes off. So I'm very useful to traveling. It's been my career for the last 8 years as a Foreign Service officer.
It's my curse. I cannot sleep on planes unless I get first class, which is never, of course. Well, let me ask you this. One of the things that has been leveled against Congressman Kahele, who, as you said, is running for governor, he hasn't even finished his first term representing the 2nd Congressional District. And of course, he had his reasons for coming back. He wants to serve Hawaii here at home. But he also took the job from Tulsi Gabbard, who did serve 8 full years, if I have that right. But some concern there. Why didn't you stay? You'd be a natural candidate for the U.S. Senate. You could gain seniority. What's your commitment to CD2 if you are able to get elected?
Yeah, I'm very proud to be the only candidate in the race that's made the commitment that if I'm elected, I will not seek any other office. I will not seek to run for Senate, governor, lieutenant governor. I'm committed to this seat. And that's my commitment to CD2. This seat has had 3 representatives in the last 10 years. And our rural neighbor island communities are losing out. and we need someone committed to doing the job.
So you're from Windward, Oahu. I think you have some Big Island connections as well. What do you know about CD2, as we call it? Because for those who aren't familiar out there, CD1, the 1st Congressional District, Ed Case represents that seat. It's primarily urban Honolulu. And the CD2 seat, of course, is the rest of the state, which, as you mentioned, is all these different islands. What do you know about CD2?
Mm-hmm. CD2 is very diverse. Each island has its own set of issues. My family roots is actually, my Hawaiian side is from Maui on Ulupalakua, actually, and my Puerto Rican, my Latino side is actually from Hawaii Island in Kurdistan. My parents actually reside in Waimea on Hawaii Island. And so, when it comes to Hawaii Island, a lot of the issues are also personal to my own family. For example, my mom and dad are getting older and they need healthcare. And they're actually talking about moving to Honolulu because they want proper healthcare. And that's a story that's not uncommon. Many families in CD2 are talking about that. And so I understand personally that we need someone who's going to advocate for proper access to healthcare on the neighbor islands, but also understand the varied issues. One of the other big issues on Maui, the access deer issue. Invasive species has, even during my short time in the legislature, I've been a champion on biosecurity and invasive species, working on these types of issues. And so the access deer, I was up country several times. I'm the vice chairman for the Water and Land Committee. So if a rancher or farmer wants me out there, I show up. And that's my type of style. I'm hands-on, and this is what CD2 needs. But going back to that access deer issue, these invasive species are destroying the fields for our crops out there, and our farmers need assistance, our ranchers need assistance. But it's understanding and being able to be out there. It's not about just cruising in Honolulu when you're the congressman. It's about getting out there into the field.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it's not just upcountry Maui. I think Lanai and Molokai in particular has an access deer problem. And
absolutely,
essentially, if I understand it, they're able to roam free. There are fences. The DLNRs tried to control this, but they're getting into cropland. They're getting into other areas, and they are invasive. Are they invasive? They're invasive.
They
of
are
course
invasive.
There were deer here in Hawaii.
And this is where the congressperson really can be helpful. One of the biggest issues is there's not enough USDA inspectors to bring this meat to market. This could be a huge food source for Hawaii. And this is where the congressperson can come in and advocate for more USDA inspectors.
Venison, I guess.
Yeah, venison, exactly.
Let me ask you one more about the State House. Some have also said, gee, why don't you spend a little more time in local politics, getting to know the legislature better, getting to know the Capitol in general, the county government situation. Some say, gee, maybe you're a little too ambitious, a little too eager to get into Washington without, if you will, earning your chops. How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So I'll share a little bit about my personal story. I'm the son of a teenage mom and a dad who didn't finish high school. Statistically, my background, my biography is not supposed to say former U.S. diplomat, current state representative, and now a candidate for Congress. When I applied for the Foreign Service that only has a 3% pass rate, the average age was 35. I got in at 23, right? We need someone right now, especially in Hawaii. Our country and our state is at a crossroads, and we need bold leaders willing to step up and willing to fight for Hawaii.
It's interesting. Jill Takuda, of course, is your primary opponent, and we're going to visit with her later on. Were you surprised that more folks didn't jump into this race, particularly Democrats? Every time a CD1 or a CD2 seat has opened up, you've seen a flood of pretty well-known Democrats, at least 4 or 5 or 6. Why do you think more people didn't jump into this race?
Yeah, I think it actually goes to because this is everyone's up for re-election, right? Many of the normal faces that we would have seen are usually senators who can,
state senators
who don't need to give up their seats.
So in other words, that's a very good point. I think the council has the same situation. If any of those people that are running because of reapportionment, they would be risking losing their day job,
exactly.
if you will, to get. But you decided to do it.
Yeah, we need bold leaders who are willing to step up to the plate. And this is my thing. Regardless if I'm in office or out of office, I will still serve the community. I'm not a lawmaker that's afraid about being out of office. We need leaders who are willing to risk and be bold and step up to the plate.
If you do lose, and I don't want to botch it here, have you thought about what you might do?
I recently received a commission into the Navy Reserves as an intelligence officer. But my commitment is to Hawaii. And so regardless of in office or out of office, I'm committed to Hawaii.
Let's talk about the U.S. House. You have experience, as we discussed, on Capitol Hill. It's not a place where there's a lot of agreement these days. There's quite a lot of harsh partisan differences. There are some very strong personalities. yes, on the Democratic side, but also on the Republican side, Marjorie Taylor Greene, people that don't want to, for example, remove their firearm before they go through the magnetic detectors into the Capitol. Why would you want to go and work in such an environment? I mean, many people that have served in the House, in the Senate, and many who have left have said they've never seen things as bad as they are right now. Why would you want to go? Why do you want to go there?
It's also similar with my parents. When I told them that I was going to serve in Colombia, they're like, why do you want to serve in Colombia or Pakistan or Venezuela, right? It's about service and going to where you can be of need. Thank you very much. And wanting to help. And especially, I think my background as a former US diplomat and what my career represents of aloha diplomacy and really wanting to bring that can help build bridges, build over differences. And currently, as you know, I represent District 50, which is a conservative district, purple district.
Yes, it is.
Yes, and I'm very fortunate that when I ran for office, my message wasn't good Democrats, bad Republicans, but continued strong leadership. It doesn't matter about red or blue. We need someone that's willing to just do what's right for the people of Hawaii.
Of course, Cynthia Phelan, perhaps the bluest red Republican that we have had in the legislature, and bless her, we all love her and all the hard work that she did. So purple, but also leaning towards Cynthia's big thing was hemp, of course.
Exactly.
She did make some progress there. But let's bring up another issue that has divided the Congress, that is dividing the country. There is a very good possibility that the House is going to fall to the Republican Party. We'll see. There's a lot of dynamics happening. The latest I heard is the Senate might be held by Democrats, but right now we're expecting a red wave, depending on this, depending on that. There's a lot of concern that what happened with the Supreme Court just a couple of weeks ago, the decisions on Roe versus Wade, the decisions on gun control, the decisions on the EPA being able to curb carbon emissions. There's decisions on religion, right? The football coach who wanted to pray afterwards and so forth. I've never seen a Supreme Court like this. Now the Congress, particularly the House, but also the Senate, is talking about codifying, about making sure that abortion, for example, is something that becomes a national law, although the various states can have their differences, gun control as well. One of the things that is moving right now is the gay marriage rights issue. The House did pass, with the help of a lot of Republicans, not all of them, to try and make gay marriage the law of the land. Do you think that there might be room in the House and Senate to reach compromise on these very same issues that the Supreme Court has decided by a 6-3 ruling?
I do believe there's opportunity there. I'm not going to be able to convince everyone, but there are actually a lot of moderate Republicans who are willing to reach across the aisle. I'll give you a quick lesson from Hawaiian history. Senator Inouye and Senator Ted Stevens were famous for their relationship, right? And they understood, that they being friends would actually help their states, regardless if Republicans or Democrats were in office. And that's the same type of leadership that I have as well in the state house, or when I was abroad, across the table from communist guerrillas, right? We need someone that's willing to work across the aisle, to find common ground and build that and work on the issues.
If you can find common ground with a communist guerrilla, you're saying perhaps you could find common ground with someone with very different political views than yourself, because it really doesn't look right now that there's been a lot of consensus, although we are starting to see, as I say, this reaction to the Supreme Court, because the polls are still showing strongly in support of gay marriage rights, strongly in support of abortion rights, even gun control. Today, at least in the Advertiser, there was a poll, or yesterday, about being concerned about having too many guns on our streets. But there's also a sense from those on the conservative side, the Republican Party, saying, this is our chance, and this is really the direction the country is going. Where do you think the country is going right now?
I think right now, the direction where we're going, we've gone back 50, 60 years. With the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade, that is horrific. We have to do something more, and I feel like our country is backsliding. And this is why we need leaders who are, this is what I always say is, we don't need just strong leaders, we need leaders that are ready for this moment, right? We need leaders that are ready to stand up for these issues and have always stood up for these issues. I'm very proud in my short time in the state legislature, within 6 months of being elected, I was able to pass the prohibition of the possession of ghost guns, right? Most people told me as a freshman, why are you touching guns? Aren't you worried about your reelection? And for me, it doesn't about that. It's about getting to the hard issues and working and being consistent. And this is what we need in Congress, a bold leader that's willing to work and fight for these issues to make sure our country is moving in the right direction.
I do want to bring up guns and also your opponent, but let me get to just a few other issues. How do you feel about the commission on January 6th, the one that's 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and Liz Cheney, of course, has taken a prominent lead, the daughter of the former vice president. Have you been following closely what they've been doing in regards to President Trump and what happened on January the 6th?
Yeah, I've been following, and for me, it being posted to Venezuela, where we saw a democracy that was crumbling, democratic institutions that were crumbling, and constant attacks by the Maduro regime, it makes me very nervous where in our own country that we see democratic institutions being eroded. And what I'm seeing in our country today is very nerve-wracking. And for me, my 2 young cousins, who I have 7 younger cousins. I'm not blessed with children of my own, but I have 7 younger cousins that I consider very close to me, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running for office. I'm worried about the America they're going to be growing up in.
You mentioned Maduro and Venezuela. My understanding is that the Biden administration, given the inflation crisis, the fuel crisis, has tried to reach out to somehow patch up some of those divisions. Republicans, however, have said, you're dealing with a dictator here, an authoritarian regime. Why are you doing this? For that matter, I believe Venezuela and Colombia and another country were not invited to President Biden's Latin American summit that he recently had in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand, particularly with your diplomatic background, particularly the fact that if you serve in the House, you might well be on the Foreign Service Committee or Armed Services. How do you feel about U.S.'s role in the Americas here? Should we be reaching out? Should we be drawing lines?
Absolutely. As a former U.S. diplomat, we should always be reaching out. Diplomacy is always first, and I think it's always important to have that conversation, right? Regardless if you're on opposite sides. But I'm also very practical as well. Being in Venezuela, I saw those human rights abuses in that the Maduro regime was doing, right? But those conversations always need to happen. I always say, in the toughest conversations come practical solutions.
Have there been situations where no practical solution was going to work when you're sitting across the table from someone in Colombia or in Pakistan or Venezuela, and you just had to say, give up or, walk away from the table?
I never say just give up. I say, we'll come back to it.
Okay. I was going over your website. You have stressed Hawaiian values, aloha, kuleana, lokahi, I suppose, as well. And I think you said that you've actually talked about these values with different governments, with different people in different countries. How's that gone over?
It's my first year in my diplomatic training. One of the first public speaking activities that I had to do was actually talking about the Hawaiian overthrow to a group of college students in Seoul, which was fascinating.
Did they know anything about it?
They knew quite a lot because for them, they related it to the Japanese occupation of Korea. But it was very, before I went into the State Department, I thought about this, we're not gonna, the overthrow is a very touchy subject. People encourage that. And that was very great for me as an indigenous person, one of the very few Native Hawaiians at the State Department, that I got to talk about my history openly in a public forum. And that was amazing to me, that type of thing can happen.
If you are elected, you'd be the only Native Hawaiian in Congress. Currently, that's Kaikahele. Before that, the late Senator Akaka. And of course, you'd have to go back to the territorial period. Where do you stand on so-called Hawaiian issues? And I'm thinking in particular, the overthrow of 1893 and the annexation of 1898, the apology. As you also are probably aware of, there are still efforts to push for sovereignty. Senator Akaka himself tried to have his own Akaka bill passed, recognizing some sort of self-determination. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think this is where I, as a former U.S. diplomat, have some experience in this. I was in Colombia before the peace process and after the peace process, where we set up truth-telling commissions and we went around the country allowing people to tell their stories. That was really important during that time. But here in Hawaii, one of the things that we need to do is have that same thing. Native Hawaiians for too long feel like they're invisible. They feel like their voices are not being heard.
Please.
Oh, thank you.
I'll take yours.
Thank you. You're very kind. Yeah. Excuse me.
We can drink water live, right?
Thank you. Well,
let's continue along these points because the Native Hawaiian population is very disproportionately overrepresented in our prisons and our jails, and there are health concerns as well. It's also hardly a homogenous group. It's a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. You must be encountering various people on the campaign trail that are, I don't know, pro-sovereignty or pro-TMT or anti-TMT or this and that. How do you walk that line as a Native Hawaiian?
Especially for me, with my former background as a U.S. diplomat, I look at the role as the next congressperson, not someone who will decide what is necessary for Native Hawaiians, but to be a convener of people. That's what we need for our Native Hawaiian community. Regardless if you believe in free association, sovereignty, nation within a nation model, we need those voices to come out. A wise kupuna once told me, when you walk into the forest, do you only want to hear one bird singing? You want to hear many voices and have that cacophony of sound. And that's the role of the next congressperson, is to convene. And if elected, I would love to convene, truth-telling commissions, going around to our island, speaking to our Native Hawaiian communities. And the number one thing I want to emphasize for Native Hawaiians is allowing us to decide what's best for us. That's the number one thing I feel, regardless of where you are on the sovereignty issue or the political spectrum, Hawaiians feel that our decisions are being made by other people and not our own communities.
This last session of which you were involved in the legislature, called by many people very historic, and that includes the $600 million that's going to go to Hawaiian homelands to help beneficiaries, of which there's a lengthy, interminable, in some cases, waiting list. There's also money, increased ceded land revenue, I believe, for OHA. There's a whole management restructuring of Mauna Kea. I was checking your biography. It says that you helped to secure that $600 million in funding for DHHL. How did you do that? Because you're just a freshman, and as you know, the way that building works, it's seniority, and there's certain people that have more power than others. What role did you play in that?
Absolutely. I currently sit on the finance committee, so that was very important to me. And I had shared with Speaker Saiki as well as Finance Chair Sylvia Luke that Native Hawaiian issues were really important to me. And this is why I introduced several measures. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there's a piece of property that's vacant on Diamond Head by KCC behind Diamond Head Theater. And I put in a bill that would be the first direct land transfer from the University of Hawaii to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands for there to be a homestead.
Is that right next door, the one that essentially is Mauka, right? And it's like one of the best views of Honolulu, if I remember correctly, because they're putting up the new Diamond Head Theater, but then there's this big lot. That is actually a ceded land or state land?
It's actually owned by the University of Hawaii.
Oh, I stand corrected.
And so I put in that bill, and right now the University of Hawaii and the Department of Hawaiian Homeland are talking about this. And that was one of my biggest commitments, was making sure that we put Native Hawaiians in the urban core in good areas. And this is something that's very important. I'm also very proud to be the author of the Olelo Apology Bill, for the state apologizing for the 90-year ban of Olelo Hawaii in our public schools.
You managed to get some pretty big attention for a freshman lawmaker. If I remember, you were actually on the front page of the Honolulu Star Advertiser, is that right? And I think Ben Cayetano, our former governor, had spoken out saying he didn't really think there was Hawaiians that had been punished for speaking. And of course, he and others, or he was strongly corrected on that issue. But this is something that you feel is very important. Do you speak Hawaiian yourself?
I am not fluent, but I am a graduate of the Kamehameha schools, and I felt it was very important. I used my blood to get into the school. I should at least have a knowledge of my language. And so as much as possible, I do try to speak Olelo Hawaii. I do my invocations in Olelo Hawaii, because it's also important to normalize Olelo Hawaii. The state has 2 official languages, and we pay lip service to the Hawaiian side.
Let me skip back to Trump. If the 1/6 Commission wraps up with some recommendations to the Department of Justice, which apparently is looking into what to do with Mr. Trump as well, we'll see where this turns out. Georgia is also looking at some campaign violations. Do you think it's conceivable that President Trump could be prosecuted by the Department of Justice?
I do believe it could be conceivable.
Do you think he was a betrayer of the Constitution?
I do believe so.
Let's skip to Mr. Biden. There are many people concerned about his age, that he's not as sharp mentally as he used to be. He just got COVID, although he is recovering, and we wish him all well. COVID has been, Joe Manchin has COVID now too, just about everybody does. But there's been some people talking in the Democratic Party about maybe he shouldn't be the nominee come 2024. He is 78 or 79 years old. Where do you stand on your own party's nominee? or president, actually.
Yeah. I support President Biden. I started under the Obama administration. I actually worked on several of his visits to Colombia and throughout Latin America. When it comes to the next election, I do hope we have a robust conversation about that. Our party is a Big Tent party, and we have many diverse factions. And for me personally, I would like to see a candidate that is reflective of the Big Tent, right? It would be great to see a woman president. It would be great to see a minority president and someone that's reflective of the diversity of the United States. But if our party does choose President Biden as our next nominee, I am proud to fall in line and also support.
Are there some potential candidates in the Democratic Party that you would look to as possible future leaders?
I follow. I think Vice President Kamala Harris. I do appreciate her leadership. Pete Buttigieg as well. Elizabeth Warren has great ideas as well. But what gets me excited is to have this exchange and this dialogue. And that's what I love about our democracy, is having this dialogue, this exchange, and seeing the ideas and figuring out what is best representative of our party.
But you're not going to, of course, commit. No one's going to commit right now. But do you think Biden will be the nominee in 2024?
I'm not sure. I also didn't think that I would be running for Congress this year, right? Like, life changes very quickly.
Put water on the ground, please. You got it, Alana. Thank you very much. I know she puts up a sign and I make embarrassing remarks and include mentioning her name. That's why we love working with each other. You mentioned Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, and as well Kamala Harris. There is a battle within the Democratic Party nationally. Some of it is seen here between the more progressive wing of the party and people that are more moderate. Ed Case, a Blue Dog Democrat. Where do you stand in that big tent? Are you in the middle, or you are on the left and the right?
You're asking if I'm a monkey in that big circus.
But well, it is a big circus.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
For me, I would say I'm a progressive, but a progressive that likes to get something done. I'm willing to work across the aisle, work across in our own party to find solutions, right? One of the biggest things that I see in our party today is we're not about action and doing something. We're just pointing fingers to the other side. We need people who are willing to commit and work on issues and get something done. And regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat, it's sad that 14% of the country feels that Congress is doing something. I've shared a little bit about my story, right? My parents were on welfare growing up. I do believe the government can help people, and it should help people and should be responsive to people. And this is what I believe in, and I want to change that in government.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the platforms that the Democratic Party has traditionally supported. And there's proposals to expand Medicare and Medicaid, for example, talking about people that need help from the government for healthcare or for a paycheck, Social Security. Where do you stand on these things? There is some concern about whether Social Security in particular is sustainable because the population numbers aren't quite as high. There are people that want Medicare. Is it Medicaid or Medicare for all? I always get the
Medicare for all.
Thank you, Bernie Sanders. Well, where do you stand on that? Yeah. Is that something that you would like to see the government have? Because that's a major expansion and that's going to cost money.
I do support Medicare for all. This kind of goes back to my international experience. I've been part of all types of medical situations, whether it was in Seoul or Colombia or whatnot. But what I saw was there's other countries that have less resources than us, but have better care. And I feel our country can do better and take care. And this, if I can touch on this a little bit, this is also very critical to CD2. When it comes to Medicare reimbursements and Medicaid reimbursements, they actually, how they do reimbursements, they have two distinctions, urban and rural. And so usually the rural reimbursements are not as much as in urban areas. But as you know, living in Hawaii Island, living in Maui, Molokai, Lanai, and Kauai is just as expensive, if not more. And so we need someone that's going to be willing to dive in and help. And many people in our rural communities, doctors are not getting the proper amount of reimbursement, so they don't practice or they don't accept Medicare or Medicaid. And so we need to look into that and change it. We need to help our rural communities to make sure they have proper access to healthcare.
Okay. This is from your website. As the only state in the country that can produce all forms of renewable energy, Hawaii can serve as a model for the nation. In Congress, Patrick is committed to helping facilitate the transition of our state and nation to a clean energy economy by growing investment in geothermal energy exploration and production in Hawaii. Well, we do have a 2045 plan to get to 100% renewables. But right now, with gas prices, they're starting to come down a little bit, but it was still $5.49 when I checked the gas station before I came over here. And Joe Manchin has recently said he's not ready to work on a climate change plan for Joe Biden because inflation is so high. I mean, you're hearing more people say, let's drill more, let's burn more coal. How can we really make this transition to what most people agree is an existential crisis that will be with us for a long time to come? I mean, can we really start reducing carbon emissions and relying more on renewable energy?
We can. If we look at now currently what's happening in Europe, right, with Ukraine and with Germany, right, with the gas pipeline,
Right.
you know, gas is kind of a supplemental before Germany goes completely green. But they're still pushing ahead. In Europe, they have 2035 that they'll be transitioning to EVs. The United States doesn't have a law like that. We're behind. We need to do more, and I do believe that we can transition. We should have been doing this, you know,
Well,
5-10 years ago.
in the meantime, Putin is looking at winter coming, and the fuel needs for Europe are going to be much larger, and Germany in particular is heavily dependent on that fuel coming from Russia. I guess what I'm getting at is there doesn't seem to be the appetite to talk about climate change when we're all worried about what we're paying at the pump and we're seeing what's going on internationally.
Well, this is where the government can come in. It doesn't mean it's an either or, right? We can still produce renewable energies, but also help our working class families, and we need to do that.
I mean, when you get into Congress, is that going to be one of your major platforms? It is on your website. Climate change is going to be key, and then you're going to go meet a guy like Joe Manchin who gets all his money from coal industries, and of course it's West Virginia. It's a state that's heavily dependent on that. I'm wondering if you're going to encounter that wall that I keep talking about, the one that you're saying I'm always going to keep talking at the table. And I think you have a lot of optimism, and I admire that. But I worry that once you get into Congress, you're going to go, "Wow, this is going to just be." This is much harder than I thought.
No, absolutely. We know there are insurmountable issues facing our country every day. But if we have leaders that will be like, I'm going to give up and just move to something else, those are not the leaders we need in office. We need leaders who are excited to work on these insurmountable issues. If we don't have leaders that are willing to, hit that wall 3 or 4 times and then break through on the 4th, then, our country is doomed. And so I'm hopeful, and I think this is a big issue, and especially for Hawaii, it's so critical. We're one of the most unique states in the union, and we need to work on climate change.
And we're also the most heavily dependent on imports for food, not as much for energy, but still heavily dependent. By the way, that building, the Capitol, is full of a lot of people that think the last election was stolen. How do you rationalize with someone like that, who believes what most reasonable people believe to be a big lie, that it was a fair election, that Joe Biden won by 7 million votes? How do you talk with someone who believes that it was an election steal?
I think the way you talk with them is just to listen, right? There's a lot of frustrations in our country. I do not agree that the election was stolen, but I'm not going to just say, hey, we don't agree, and just push them on the side. I will sit there and I will listen and try to find common ground. Usually we can't find common ground on this issue, but people, when they speak to me, especially, Republicans that I represent in District 50, they feel that I'm someone that actually listens to them.
Do you hear people when you go around saying, hey, the election was stolen?
I do, actually.
How do you respond? Do you just listen, or do you say, you're wrong?
No, I say I don't agree with you.
Okay. I admire that. All right, here's more from your website. Pat, has a plan to diversify Hawaii's economy beyond just tourism by creating good-paying jobs in clean energy, cybersecurity, boosting federal support for Hawaii's farmers, to reduce Hawaii's food supply and our dependence on the continent. Pat will also work to bring federal funding back to Hawaii, to build housing and infrastructure and allow people born in Hawaii to be able to afford and stay in Hawaii. We've been saying this decade after decade after decade: diversify the economy, stop the brain drain. And I'm just going to challenge you here. Can you give me a solid plan or a solid proposal to try and make these things happen?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. We've been saying this for decades, right? These issues we've been talking about before I was even born. I was being interviewed earlier. My favorite book is Price of Paradise by Randall Ross.
2 volumes.
The 2 volumes. I have both volumes, and these are the same issues we've been talking about.
I want to say it was the was that the 1990s or so that those came out?
Right.
Many of those books, last time I read them, one's red, right? One's blue. How interesting that they were red and blue. We didn't associate red and blue like we do with the division of the country, but it's uncanny how some things have never really changed, including diversification, getting more ag. How are you going to build agriculture here when it's so much cheaper to grow food and ship it on the mainland?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I know that we have a NASA, we have, an industry here, but it's just a small percentage of our GDP.
Yeah. And this is my challenge to also the career politicians that are out there. I'm tired of them paying lip service to these same issues. And there's no remorse that they have not tackled these issues. And this is my generation is feeling that effect. I am the state representative for Kailua and Kaneohe, and I cannot afford a home in my own community. That's a problem.
That's
a very problem.
Very interesting.
And now the paradigm is shifting. When I graduated from high school, it was about going away to the continent, studying, and coming home and getting a job. My two cousins just graduated from Kala'e High School. And when I talk to them, the paradigm shift, and they say, if I want to have a job, have a house, have a family, I have to move to the continent. Yeah. That's a problem. Yeah. And that's sad. And this is why I'm running for office, is to challenge that. And going back to the specifics, because, I just don't want to be all waha, right?
Although you're good at it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Portuguese Hawaiian, so,
But how are you going to get your cousins, your friends who are saying, look, I can't own a place, I can't find a job that's going to pay me what I need to survive here? A concrete proposal.
Yeah, it's going to take all of government to work together, but at the federal level, one of the ways I see Hawaii has a competitive advantage is green renewable technology. In District 50, we have a wave energy facility that's being tested right out of Kaneohe Marine Corps Base. We're the only state in the union that can produce all forms of renewable energy. This is critical because, number one, this can reduce the cost of energy for households, our electric bills, etc. But number two, a lot of businesses want to come and test their resources, their technology here in a safe manner, bringing high-paying jobs into Hawaii. And this is one of the things I want to work on when I get to Congress. And when it comes to affordable housing, I don't want to be just reiterating this, but the number one way we can help Hawaii is having someone committed to the seat to build seniority, building those relationships, and bring those federal dollars to Hawaii to make sure our families can stay here.
Let's shift to gun control. It's become an issue in your campaign. This is from a campaign email recently from you. As the nation still mourns the tragic shootings in Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo, New York, our voters are tired of lip service and inaction from politicians on the issue of gun violence, and they should be. My opponent, this is Jill Takuda, you're referring to without naming, gave a typical career politician answer, but eventually admitted to completing an NRA, National Rifle Association, endorsement questionnaire. The voters of Hawaii deserve to know how and why she earned the NRA's endorsement. I know Jill Takuda a bit. She's going to come on later. She doesn't exactly strike me as a Marjorie Taylor Greene type, someone who is carrying a gun around in Hawaii. I wonder whether this was a fair attack on her, given that she has said, she has actually a strong gun control background in terms of her legislation. Was it a fair attack?
I think what is important, you can be, against ending gun violence, but as you know, and as I know, when you fill out a questionnaire, and you're seeking an endorsement of an organization. And I think it's really important to show that in 2012, she was endorsed by the NRA when she was in Senate. And 2 years later, in 2014, 2 years after Sandy Hook, still had a B rating. We need someone that's going to be consistent and not pander to both sides. And that's what the public is tired of.
Well, as I said, I don't get the sense, having covered the legislature and knowing a bit about her record, that she really is. I mean, this is a state that has very low gun violence, relatively speaking. There are a lot of people that have guns here. We've seen those numbers, but we always come up as one of the safest states. Having said that, of course, we have had mass shootings like at the Xerox building. Let me read something from Jill Takuda today. This just went out in an email from her campaign. She was responding to a negative attack, not from you, but from a super PAC that she says has distorted her record in leadership on gun violence prevention. And here she's being quoted by herself. Imagine the disappointment to people across Hawaii when they woke up to see mainland dark money distorting my record at the inferred direction of my opponent. That's you. As a mom with 2 kids in public schools, I am sickened that there is an ad politicizing tragic school shootings. That's every parent's worst nightmare. It's a shame my opponent can't generate enough support here in Hawaii to run an honorable Hawaii-based campaign, and that he, meeting you, is turning to outside dark money to compete. That's a very strong statement that came out from Jill today. Your response?
My response to this is, then why did you fill out an NRA questionnaire? You can be strong on ending gun violence, but why did you fill that? You know what the easier thing to do is? Just as I did, I took that NRA endorsement envelope, threw it in the rubbish can. Why did you fill that out, and why did you fill out that questionnaire? That's my big question. And the voters here in Hawaii are sick and tired of politicians giving lip service to both sides, saying, hey, I'm strong on ending gun violence, but I had an NRA endorsement. It just doesn't make sense. And we need leaders that are willing to stand on their records and making sure that they're not providing hollow words anymore. And I'm very strong. Within 6 months on the job, I passed a bill ending the possession of ghost guns. We need someone that's not going to be going back and forth or flip-flopping.
Well, again, I just have to ask, I mean, do you picture Jill Takuda actually favoring open use of guns, open carry, that has led, some argue, to these kind of, I mean, a super PAC is putting money out in this. And I realize you can't coordinate directly. There is a law against that. But couldn't you at least announce it and say, you know, I definitely brought up the NRA thing, but maybe this goes too far, and I wish these ads weren't running?
Well, there's questions in this election. My opponent we've only had one public televised forum and has not agreed to be on anything else with me. There are a lot of questions out there, and the voters need to know and ask those questions and ask those records and look at the records and show that my opponent had an NRA endorsement.
Right. Did she decline debate appearances with you?
I sent a letter to her requesting that we have a public forum on every island, and she responded saying that a 30-minute PBS Insights was sufficient.
Okay, one more thing regarding super PAC money. There are other interest groups that are spending money on your behalf. There's money spending on Jill Takuda's behalf as well. And we'll talk about that, or I'll talk about that with her. But she's saying that to date, super PACs are spending over $500,000 on TV ads. That includes the Uvalde and Buffalo shootings, to run TV ads and to mail and flood our airways and mailboxes to influence this race, and there's no sign of slowing them down. Your super PACs include Web3 Forward. When I say your super PACs, I mean super PACs supporting you. Their cryptocurrency interest. Bold PAC, that's a Latinos PAC. Equality PAC, LGBTQ. Would you ever be in a position where you would just turn that money down and say, you know, I'm not going to take this outside money. I'm just going to focus on donations from people here in Hawaii?
And I am focusing on donations from people in Hawaii. You cannot and do not coordinate with outside campaigns. And so, but it just shows the sad reality of our politics today. And if I'm elected, I will want to work on a law that codifies and overturns People United and make it
Citizens United.
Citizens United, excuse me.
I mean, the Congress could do that. This is the Supreme Court ruling that allows unlimited money by business interests, labor unions, essentially allowing for these kind of PACs to spend unheeded. Is that you would actually work for campaign finance reform?
Absolutely. It's a sad reality that a few people on a couch or billionaires feel that their voice is stronger than our voters. And I am guaranteed and committed to working on this on day one. We not only need to go and overturn Citizens United, we need to also have campaign finance reform. We also need to make it easier for people to run for office. I'm very proud to be one of the authors of the bill that allows for women and other family members to use campaign funds for childcare or adult senior care. It's a shame that we had that at the federal level, but we didn't even have that on Hawaii level. We need campaign finance reform. Too many people are sick and tired of the corruption in our government.
Do you ever watch one of those commercials that's being run on your behalf, attacking your opponent? Go, ugh.
I actually don't have a TV. I haven't owned a TV in 10 years. My team does tell me about it, but I don't own a TV.
You're a politician running for office and you don't watch TV?
Yeah.
But you are aware. You're very connected. You're plugged in. You are aware of these ads.
Yes, my team did brief me on that.
Okay, let's switch. Nancy Pelosi apparently wants to go to Taiwan. That has upset Beijing, and that has upset the Biden administration, the Department of Defense. Of course, that's a very delicate situation. How do you respond to that? The speaker, who may or may not still be speaker come November, we'll see, But what do you feel about that? You've heard about this, that she wants to visit Taiwan.
Yeah. You know, Taiwan is a very delicate issue, but we also need to recognize the geopolitical sphere. And, you know, before she would go, you know, one, she's the Speaker of the House. She can decide and do whatever she wants. And, you know, I'm someone that, really respects separation of powers.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if I was elected, I would actually reach out to my colleagues at the Department of State. One of the interesting things.
Let's
Thank you.
hydrate. We're going to hydrate. It's water. Don't worry.
Excuse me.
People don't do that. They don't stop and drink enough water.
Yeah, they don't.
It's so important. Okay, it's below the table. Alana. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, she's a tough lady, and she does travel a lot. But you said if for some reason you were able to get into Congress, and she'll probably be the minority leader, if not the speaker. We'll see how that goes. But you would reach out to your colleagues at the DOD and talk about this. I mean, that's a pretty strong symbol. The Speaker of the House visiting Taiwan, which China believes is still part of its Kuleana, if you will.
Exactly.
And given what's happened with Russia and Ukraine, some concern that there's an inevitable attack on Taiwan, which is pretty much in our backyard.
I'll tell you a story from
Sure.
my diplomatic years. So we did several presidential, vice presidential visits, Secretary of State visits. And so what would happen is this big entourage would come in, for example, Colombia, you know, a plane full of people, and they would immediately start demanding things, right? They would say, I need this. And these demands sometimes were not realistic.
Yeah.
But what they failed to recognize is we fostered these relationships as diplomats, and that if they break these relationships, it could ruin our ability to function in the country, right? And so that's kind of the lens and perspective I come from as a former US diplomat, to think about the greater geopolitical strategy is, if a visit from the Speaker of the House, how will that affect the relationships in the region? And so, you know, as I told you prior, I have a very pragmatic viewpoint when it comes to the type of foreign policy. And I think that's where my competitive advantage is, because I've actually done this before and actually been in those rooms to understand.
What should the U.S. position be? And I know there is an official position, one that Biden is kind of not erased, but made people question. What is your view if for some reason China decides to take Taiwan?
Yeah.
What should the U.S. do?
I'm going to give you the State Department answer is we don't answer on hypotheticals, but we do need to uplift in the region and also stay committed to our partners and our democratic partners in the region.
You know, I'm wondering, why didn't you stay in the Forest Service? You're pretty good at this diplomacy thing, I'm noticing. You could have had probably a pretty good career, and you may still have that developed this, but why not stay in that field?
Because Hawaii is my pico. This is home. And I just recently, I'll be very frank with you. It's poho, right? Without substance, if I'm not willing to step up to the plate. We don't have many Native Hawaiians who run for office. I receive so much from my community, so much from my family, so much from my teachers and my neighbors. If I'm not willing to step up to the plate and fight for Hawaii, that's poho. And so this is why I'm running for office.
Okay, just a couple more questions. We're in the last 10 minutes here. We spoke about Russia and Ukraine briefly. What is your view on that situation? Now the foreign minister is saying, no, in fact, we do want the whole country, although I understand Moscow is trying to pedal back on that one, but they're heavily focused on the eastern part of that country. And of course, this is a huge crisis in Europe and the region in general. Do you think the Biden administration is taking the right approach regarding Putin and Russia and Ukraine?
I do believe so. They've taken the right approach. For me, I would like to see more empowerment of the European Union, because that is right on their back door, right? And, you know, for us as the United States, it's important to always uphold democratic partners, but it's also to get that regional context in that area and see how we can work together to find a solution. But number one, we need to make sure that we are fighting for democracy and freedom. And clearly, Russia is not interested in the freedom and democracy of Ukraine.
You know, one of the things that some have pointed out is that there's a lot of people that support the EU and the European, NATO and the Western countries in general, but not a lot of support coming out of Latin America or out of Africa or out of Southeast Asia. In fact, China and India and South Africa and others have been, Brazil, they're not coming out and joining the Biden campaign and trying to support Zelensky and tear down Russia. I mean, that is a concern as a diplomat. We seem to have many friends in this world, but there's a lot of people out there that think that we have a pretty bad track record in how we've behaved in foreign countries. Look at Latin America alone, the situation in Chile where they overthrow a government, the situation in Iran. I mean, I could go on and on, the Vietnam War, the Korean War. Do you feel good about America's role in the world?
That's a good question. I'll share another story from my diplomatic years. I was the cultural attaché in Venezuela, and one of our jobs was to help promote freedom of speech. And it was very difficult for me to talk about freedom of speech when our own president was attacking the press. And so
the former president, or
the former president,
okay.
Excuse me. But I recognize that. But we do have a role. Many other nations do look at us, but we also need to recognize nations are sovereign. Nations have their own viewpoints, but we can, there are certain values that I do believe that we need to be promoted around the world. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And that's what I did and what I tried to do, and through the context of Hawaii.
When the U.S. has criticized the human rights policy, like in Saudi Arabia, where a journalist was executed pretty much at the command of the prince there, and of course Biden just went and met with them. They will counter, well, you have a problem with human rights in your own country, Mr. President, Black Lives Matter, and so forth. That's a pretty fair criticism, isn't it? That we're somewhat hypocritical.
Well, I'll say we're not friends if you can't take criticism, right?
Okay.
And so you need to look at that and look at that criticism that come from other countries. And so that's diplomacy, that's conversation. When you have those hard conversations and call the kettle black, you can come up with a solution.
Okay, two final things.
Sure.
There's a Democratic Congress, House and Senate for now. There's a Democratic president. Inflation is at a 4-decade high. Who's to blame for inflation? Do the Democrats deserve some blame for this, or is it beyond the control of DC?
I think we just need to stop talking about blame and actually do something about it, right? Inflation is a global crisis that is affecting us, but it's an opportunity for us to shift and change our economy. A lot of those who are affected from inflation with increased prices were actually women staying out of the labor force, right? And this is why we need to pass programs to help people get back into the labor force. This is why we need to pass universal pre-K so women can, and fathers, families can enter the labor force. We need to stop this blame and do something and think about a vision on how we want to shift our economy.
Okay, I'm going to give you the final word. What haven't you talked about? And we've talked about a great deal. Thank you for your flexibility and your openness. But what is one final point that you want to make about why Pat Bronco should be the one to serve in CD2 in Congress?
As I shared with you, my story is improbable. Back in 1987, most likely my family would have probably moved to the continent, but we were able to stay because of the support of our family. But what is probable today is for my cousins most likely moving to the continent. It's mostly probable that families are going to continue to leave Hawaii, and I'm tired of this. And this is what our campaign is about. We need a next generation of service-oriented leadership that is willing to step up to the plate and fight for Hawaii. But not only the next generation, but leaders that have experience, a diversified experience. Our role in Hawaii is becoming, globalized. And we need leaders that understand foreign policy, national security, domestic issues, and understand how to navigate that and have good judgment and will be able to provide for Hawaii.
By the way, how's the next 2.5 weeks looking for you? The primary election is less than 3 weeks away. What's your next couple of days, couple of weeks?
For us, we don't take any vote for granted. So we'll be traveling to Kauai, Hawaii Island, Maui, Lanai, Molokai, and we'll continue on because people need to see that their leaders are willing to show up and actually care.
Okay. Pat, this has been a delight. I do want to thank Pat Bronco for being with us today. And thank you to our audience. I'm reading off my phone, by the way, because I forgot the script. I'm such a pro. For joining us for this Know Your Candidate series. Mahalo to our event partner, Chaminade University, for supporting this Know Your Candidate series and hosting us here in this amazing building, the Clarence T.C. Ching Conference Room. We hope that you'll be joining us for other candidate discussions for CD2, Jill Takutis, coming on in a couple of hours. And next week, we'll have Ed Case and Sergio Alcubilia in the CD1 race. Check our elections guide. It's on our homepage, civilbeat.org/Hawaii elections. And thank you to all the supporters and everyone who joined us live here at Chaminade University. And take care and aloha. And thanks, Pat. And we can shake.
Yeah, thank you.
Now let's drink some water.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.